fiancé slept with his first love, and on my wedding day, my fiancé's first love appeared at the wedding ceremony, wearing the exact same haute couture gown as mine. I watched them stand together at the entrance, greeting the guests as if they were the bride and groom. Maintaining a calm expression, I complimented them, saying they looked like the perfect couple, beauty and brains, a match made in heaven. She burst into tears and fled the scene. He, however, didn't hesitate to humiliate me in front of everyone, accusing me of being petty and narrow-minded. When the wedding banquet was over, he left for what was supposed to be our honeymoon, with her by his side. I didn't argue or cause a scene. Instead, I quietly booked an appointment for an abortion. The festive ribbons on the bed hadn't been cleared away, but I was too worn out to care. I lazily swept them off the bed and collapsed onto the soft mattress, feeling the weight of the day press down on me. As I plugged my phone into charge, a notification coincidentally caught my eye, a post from Susie McKinney on her social feed. "Grateful for your presence, not a moment wasted," was the caption. The attached photo showed Hank holding her in his arms, the two of them gazing into each other's eyes, barely a centimeter apart, lips on the verge of meeting. Matching couple rings gleamed on their fingers. If it were in the past, I would have stormed over and demanded an explanation from him. But now, I just quietly turned off my phone, rolled over, and went to sleep. The following days passed in silence. I didn't receive a single message from Hank. Instead, my feed was constantly flooded with Susie's updates, photos of them kissing, shopping, laughing together, as if flaunting their happiness for the world to see. I didn't react, didn't feel anger or sadness. Instead, I contacted a lawyer and began preparing for a divorce. Hank Dawson and I had been together for 8 years, since our university days. Although we had only recently hosted our wedding ceremony, in actuality, we had sealed our marriage legally right after graduation. It was a quiet, impulsive moment, no ceremony, no bridal gifts, no jewelry, just the reckless passion of two young lovers. But now, that passion had long since faded, leaving behind nothing but a mess to clean up. Nearly 2 weeks later, I was sitting at home, reviewing the draft my lawyer had prepared for the divorce. The house was quiet, but suddenly, the sound of a key turning in the lock broke the silence. I looked up, and there they were, Hank walking in hand with Susie. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of awkwardness flash across his face. He quickly let go of her hand, his voice strained as he tried to explain. "How many times do I have to tell you, there's nothing between me and Susie?" I cut him off mid-sentence, tired of the same old lie. "You and her are just like brother and sister." "Yes, I know." I looked at him, my expression calm and indifferent. There wasn't any trace of anger. Hank's face, however, grew colder, his brows furrowed in frustration, his voice, laced with helplessness, cut through the room. "Then what are you upset about this time?" "I'm busy," I replied, my attention already back on the draft in front of me, completely uninterested in meeting his gaze. But my silence only fueled his frustration. His face hardened as he wrapped his arm tighter around Susie and stormed out of the house. He made a show of slamming the door open wide, standing there, waiting for me to give in, like I always had. But not this time. I didn't even look up. With a final angry slam, he shut the door behind him. It wasn't long after they left that my parents called, asking me to come over for dinner. I agreed. When I arrived at their place, who do I run into at the door but Hank? He looked at me, something like guilt flickering across his face before he smoothed it over with a forced calm. "Are we going in together?" he asked, trying to sound casual. I nodded and walked inside without a word. The dinner was a painfully awkward affair. My parents hadn't forgiven him for what had happened at the wedding. Their coldness was obvious in every curt exchange, every sidelong glance. In the past, I might have stepped in to smooth things over, playing the mediator between my parents and Hank, but not now. This time, I let him sit there alone, awkward, as the tension thickened around us. When dinner finally ended, and I was ready to call a cab, Hank pulled up in his car. I opened the door to get in, only to see a sticker plastered across the front passenger seat, "Reserved for Susie." He cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable, and tried to explain. Susie insisted on putting it there. "You don't sit here much anyway." I nodded, my voice calm and flat. "Right, she's young. That's what girls her age do." He frowned, as if he wanted to say more, but my phone buzzed before he could. I ignored him, focusing on the messages that needed my attention. By the time I was done, we had already arrived at the villa. I stepped out of the car, and before I could take another breath, Susie was already rushing toward him, practically throwing herself into his arms. "Hank, I missed you so much," she chirped. I ignored their little exchange, deciding to walk straight into the house. But as soon as I reached the entrance, something caught my eye. A series of photos flashing across the electronic display on the wall. They were all of Susie and Hank. Some showed them cuddling while watching the sunrise. Others were of them dining together. And the last one? The both of them locked in a passionate kiss. I had barely glanced at the photos when Hank rushed over to my side, his voice hurried, desperate. "Pearl, these photos. They're fake. You have to believe me. Please don't get upset. It's not good for the baby." I turned to face him, catching the flicker of guilt in his eyes. I nodded. "They look well taken though." His brow furrowed deeper, confusion clear on his face. "Pearl, aren't you angry?" I kept my expression steady, calm. "No, not at all." Before he could press further, my phone rang. It was the doctor, calling to discuss the details of my hospital stay tomorrow. I walked away to answer the call without giving Hank's reaction a second thought. By the time I returned to the event, the scene unfolding in front of me was all too familiar. Hank stood there, shielding Susie, his voice raised as he berated someone. From their heated exchange, it wasn't hard to piece together what had happened. Someone had accidentally spilled a bit of wine on the hem of Susie's dress, and now, Hank was demanding an apology relentlessly. Watching this unfold triggered a memory, one from years ago. We had been at another banquet, much like this one. I was standing near the champagne tower when Susie shoved me, seemingly by accident. I lost my balance, crashing into the tower, shattering glasses as I fell, champagne and blood mixed as they dripped down my body. I had looked to Hank for help, but instead, he had unleashed his fury on me, his words sharp and cutting in front of everyone. Snapping back to the present, I watched him now, the same man, protecting Susie over a minor accident. It was laughable, really. Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked away. Hank didn't come home last night. I wasn't surprised. This wasn't the first time. But as I was finishing up in the bathroom, I saw him walking in with breakfast in hand, and trailing right behind him was Susie. When he saw me, he placed the breakfast on the dining table, and for once, offered an explanation. We stayed out late last night. Susie was scared to be alone, so I sent her home. It was already the middle of the night, so I just slept over. Susie, clinging to his arm, chimed in, her tone laced with mock innocence. That's right, Pearl, you're not mad, are you? I nodded without speaking. Hank seemed to pick up on my coldness, and with a rare gentleness in his voice, he placed the breakfast down and tried again. Didn't you say you've been wanting to see that new movie? I have time today, I can take you. That movie, praised by everyone since its release, had been something I asked him about, again and again. Each time, he'd turned me down, claiming he was too busy with work. Yet, just a few days later, I saw him in Susie's Instagram post. The best movie with the best person, was the caption. Though their faces weren't visible, the picture of their hands intertwined said more than enough. Even if I hadn't seen his face, I would have known it was him. The faint trace of perfume on him now, not mine, made my decision easy. No need, I said, my voice calm. I've got something to do today. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face, like he hadn't expected the rejection. He opened his mouth to say something else, but Susie had already made herself comfortable on the couch, looking at me with wide-eyed innocence. Pearl, when you say you're busy, does that mean you're meeting your university friend? I shot her a sharp look, suspicion creeping in. The only person who knew I wanted to initiate a divorce was my lawyer, and that lawyer was an old university friend. No one else knew about the matter. Seeing my suspicious look, Susie quickly turned to Hank with a look of false innocence. Hank, don't be angry when you hear what I'm about to tell you. A few days ago, my friend told me they saw Pearl with her university friend at a cafe, acting. She paused deliberately, feigning hesitation before continuing in a softer, fearful tone. Intimate. But maybe my friend was mistaken. After all, how could Pearl ever cheat on you? She loves you so much, Hank. The moment those words left her mouth, Hank's face twisted in fury. Without warning, he slammed his hand down, sending the vase on the table crashing to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. His eyes burned with rage as they locked onto me. Pearl, so you're not coming to the movies with me because you're sneaking around with another man, he spat. Do you think you're being fair to the child you're carrying? I glanced at the shards scattered across the floor but said nothing. Before I could speak, Susie, pretending to be the peacemaker, jumped in again. Hank, please don't get mad. Let's talk calmly. It's not all her fault. After all, her mother also. But before she could finish that vile sentence, I grabbed the napkin from the table and threw it at her, my hand trembling with rage. She could slander me all she wanted, but she had no right to insult my mother. The napkin left a red mark on her, and she immediately looked up at Hank with teary, wounded eyes. As expected, he rushed over to her, lifting her arm in concern. Seeing her pitiful expression, he glared at me, pointing his finger with unrestrained fury. Pearl, you've disappointed me beyond words. Even if what Susie said was untrue, you had no right to lay a hand on her. His accusations came rapid fire. You should know better I cut him off sharply, my voice cold. So you know she's lying. His face froze, caught in his own words, but it quickly shifted back to self-righteous indignation as he pointed at me again. Yes, I saw it too that day. But even so, you're still wrong to hit her. Apologize to Susie now, or we're getting divorced. A chill ran through my body, spreading like ice. I stared at him in disbelief, still holding on to a shred of hope, a final attempt to salvage what little remained between us. Hank, I said, my voice low but steady, I've scheduled an abortion. Will you go with me tomorrow?